Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, we thank you for the blessing of this Sabbath school lesson that we went through, Lord, and to study and understand more of your character, more of your virtue, Father, that we seek that high moral character to be implanted into us. We pray, Father, that through trials and through the fiery furnace, Father, of affliction, that we would come to the highest of this calling that you have given us this opportunity to be a part of, Lord. That we not fail you and that we not fail others, Lord. We just praise you and thank you, Father, for your grace and to show us your love, Lord, and compassion towards humanity. To have delayed your coming for the sake that people would be lost, Lord. It gives us hope. It gives us great hope to see, Father, the Gentiles coming in, to see the Levites coming in, to know that it was for this, Father, that you waited. And I just pray that each one of us would have that knowledge of you. And each one of us would rise to this great high calling. We pray as we continue to study today, as we open up and go through a reminder of the house of Saud and continue that study, Lord, that our minds would be mindful of the events of 1798 to 1863, because much of this goes in that time frame, Lord, and we want to better understand that history and to be able to line it, Father, with our own history. So we just pray as you continue to take us through these studies, continue to take us through this history, that it would help us, Father, to have a better understanding of the interactions of Islam with your people and with the apostates and within the nations, Lord, that we would continue to increase in understanding so you open up that light, Lord, that we so need. We thank you, Lord, and we praise you, and we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Get back to where we need to start. I'm not going to start at the end. We'll start at the beginning, not at the beginning, but we're going to review just a little bit. Just a little review as we go through here. We saw that there were 3 phases, and we'll glance through those again. 3 phases of the House of Saud that eventually became Saudi Arabia. We saw that Riyadh was the capital, and this region here, the Nijad, and then the Hijaz. We saw that we'll go through and do a couple of these passages here. That there 3 phases were the Emirate of, and I still don't know how to say that word, Diriyah. The first state, which was 1744 to 1818, and it was marked by the expansion of Wahhabism. We saw also that it was a marriage, even sealed by a marriage between Wahhab and the king, and that the Wahhabis were a puritanical, extreme puritanical sect, and that they ruled, that the two ruled with a religio-political state, and if I understand that correctly, that's a union of church and state. So then the second Saudi state was 1824, and this history becomes important to us. 1818 becomes important to us, this history here, because it falls between the time frame of 1798 and 1863, and their interactions that are happening in that region at that time. So then the third Saudi state, 1902 to the present, which then evolved into Saudi Arabia. And so those are the 3 phases here, and I started to put them up on a line. We've got here in the first Saudi state, the marriage between Mohammed bin Saud's son Abdulaziz bin Muhammad and the daughter of Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab helped to seal the pact between their families, which has lasted through the centuries to the present day. So they still do this. They still have marriages to seal these pacts as well between the House of Saud, the Saudi state, and the Wahhabis. So here, this is why we're going to back up just a little bit, because I started to draw it out on the line here to just kind of try to have a visual as we progress. And I know we won't, I'm sure we won't get till the end of this today, but we want to try to take the history between 1798 and 1863 and the events that transpire with the Saudi state as well. So the background is good to understand that in the beginning of the House of Saud, you have Wahhabism right there at the beginning, and a battle between we already looked at the role of Islam in the beginning of the Sunni Shia split, which was in the next generation right after Muhammad died. And so this first Saudi state, let's see, I know I wanted to read something here. This was in 1802. Somebody, you going to say something? No? Hang on one second, let me do the slideshow. There we go. But if anybody wants to speak up, feel free. I just can't put the chat up, so feel free to speak up if you have questions or comments. Okay, so Islamic scholars, particularly Muhammad Wahhab and his descendants, are believed to have played a significant role in Saudi rule during this period. This is the first Saudi state. Later, they were referred to as the Wahhabis, a group of particularly strict puritanical Sunni sect. The leadership of the Al-Saud during the time of their first state passed from father to son without incident. The first Imam, Muhammad ibn Saud, was succeeded by his eldest son, Abdulaziz, in 1765. In 1802, which is in the time frame we're looking at, Abdulaziz led 10,000 Wahhabi soldiers into an attack on the attack on the Shiite holy city of Karbala, is what is now southern Iraq, and where Hussein ibn Ali, the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, is buried. So this was a Shiite holy city, Karbala, that the Sunnis, the Wahhabis, actually attacked. And this was 1802. And this was going on in the region, but separate and distinct to Napoleon's Egyptian expedition and the history that we were reading there that Josiah Litch lays out. So let's see. Led by Abdulaziz, the Wahhabi soldiers killed more than 2,000 people, including women and children. The soldiers plundered the city, demolishing the massive golden dome above Hussein's tomb, and loaded hundreds of camels with weapons, jewelry, coins, and other valuable goods. So we saw the first Saudi state, 1744, the Emirate of Diriyah. Then we saw in that Saudi state, it was the expansion of Wahhabism. In 1802, you see the attack on the Shiite holy city of Karbala. The attack on Karbala convinced the Ottomans and the Egyptians, this is what's going on, separate from this. These are all transpiring to try to put this all in our mind at the same time. So this attack on Karbala convinced the Ottomans and the Egyptians that the Saudis were a threat to regional peace. Abdulaziz was killed in 1803 by an assassin believed to be a Shiite seeking revenge over the sacking of Karbala the year before. So it's believed to be a Shiite retaliation that killed him. Abdulaziz was in turn succeeded by his son Saud, under whose rule the Saudi state reached its greatest extent. And that was the third stage that was to come. By the time Saud died in 1814, his son and successor, Abdul ibn Saud, had to contend with the Ottoman Egyptian, I might have misstated this one, so we'll bypass that. We're going to continue to follow the notes, sorry. His son and successor, Abdul ibn Saud, had to contend with an Ottoman Egyptian invasion. So again, going back to the history that Josiah Litch lays out, we looked at that before in the Egyptian Ottoman War. We saw that there were the Wahhabis that were defeated, that the Sultan sent the Viceroy of Egypt to expel the Wahhabis out of the Najd region. So, so he had to contend with the Ottoman Egyptian invasion and the Ottoman Wahhabi War, seeking to retake lost Ottoman Empire territory. The mainly Egyptian force succeeded in defeating Abdullah's forces, taking over the Saudi capital of Diriyah in 1818. Abdullah was taken prisoner and was soon beheaded by the Ottomans in Constantinople, putting an end to the first Saudi state. The Egyptians sent many members of the Al-Saud clan and other members of the local nobility as prisoners to Egypt and Constantinople and razed the Saudi capital, Diriyah. So I had misstated when I talked about the third state. So this was the ending. 1818 is the end of the first Saudi state. And this transpires in the Egyptian-Ottoman War, which is 1811 to 1818. So we saw in 1802, the Ottomans and the Egyptians see that the Saudis are a threat to peace in the region. So then we have the second Saudi state. A few years after the fall of Diriyah in 1818, the Saudis were able to reestablish their authority in Najd, establishing the Emirate of Najd, commonly known as the second Saudi state, with its capital in Riyadh. Compared to the first Saudi state, the second Saudi period was marked by less territorial expansion. It never reconquered the Hijaz of Azar, for example, and less religious zeal. So you didn't have the Wahhabis so much involved, although the Saudi leaders continued to go by the title of Ayman and still employed Salafi religious scholars. The second state was also marked by severe internal conflicts within the Saudi family, eventually leading to the dynasty's downfall. In all but one instance, succession occurred by assassination or civil war, the exception being the passage of authority from Faisal ibn Turki to his son Abdullah ibn Faisal. So the second Saudi war, the first one is the expansion of Wahhabism. Then you see this Ottoman Wahhabi war, and you see the end of the first Saudi state in 1818. So this all is transpiring in this period from 1798, which is the history that we're looking at in the Millerite history for external events. So let me move this thing off my screen. Hang on one second. Okay. So you have the second Saudi state, 1824 to 1891, and it was the Emirate of Najd, internal family conflict and civil war. Sorry about that. And this is the Emirate of Najd, was the second Saudi state, and this was the Najd area in here, and then you have the Hijaz that was in this area here, which is not marked on this one here. The second Saudi period was marked by less territorial, and that's just a review of what we just read, just from another source. So we'll go ahead and keep going here. After his defeat, the Mulada Abu Rahman ibn Faisal went with his family into exile in the deserts of eastern Arabia among the Al-Murra Bedouin. Soon afterward, however, he found refuge in Kuwait as a guest of Kuwaiti Emir Mirbach al-Sabah. In 1902, Abdul Rahman's son, Abdul Aziz, took on the task of restoring Saudi rule in Riyadh. So this is Abdul Aziz, and this is going to bring about the third phase of the Saudi state here, where he captures Riyadh, and this will be and this leads to eventually to finding oil. So let's see. Is supported by a few dozen followers and accompanied by some of his brothers and relatives, Abdul Aziz was able to capture Riyadh's Masmak fort and kill the governor appointed there by Ibn Rashid. Abdulaziz, reported to have been barely 20 at the time, was immediately proclaimed ruler in Riyadh. As the new leader of the House of Saud, Abdulaziz became commonly known from that time on forward as Ibn Saud. In Western sources, though, he is still called Abdulaziz in the Arab world. So as we go through this, keep that in mind that Ibn Saud and Abdulaziz are the same person. And he's the one that captured Riyadh. Ibn Saud spent the next 3 decades trying to reestablish his family's rule over Central Arabia, starting with his native Nijad. His chief rivals were the Al-Rashid clan in Hale, the Sheriffs of Mecca in the Hijaz, and the Ottoman Turks in Al-Hassa. Ibn Saud also had to contend, however, with the descendants of his late uncle, Saban ibn Faisal, later known as the Saud al-Kabir branch of the family, who posed as the rightful heirs to the throne, though for a time acknowledging the sovereignty of the Ottoman sultans and even taking the title of Pasha, in other words, being underneath the Ottoman Empire. Ibn Saud allied himself to the British in opposition to the Ottoman-backed Al-Rashid. From 1915 to 1927, Ibn Saud's dominions were a protectorate of the British Empire pursuant of the 1915 Treaty of Dahran. So we see this progress of the Saudi state as it begins with the expansion of Wahhabism. That begins in 1744, and we see that there was a marriage with, even a literal marriage, to seal the pact between the Saudi state, the House of Saud, and the Wahhabis, which were the extreme puritanical religious ones. We see this time period here in the Millerite history, where you have the 1802, the attack on the Shiite holy city of Karbala. That's where the Prophet Muhammad's grandson is buried. And the Ottomans and the Egyptians see that the Saudis are a threat to peace. Then you have this is supposed to be 1811 here. You have 1811 to 1818, the Ottoman Wahhabi War and the end of the first Saudi state. You have the second Saudi state that was the Emirate of Nijad, and it was plagued with internal family conflicts. And then 1902, you have the rising of the third Saudi state. Ibn Saud won final victory over the Rashidis in 1921, making him the ruler of most of Central Arabia. He consolidated his dominions as the Sultanate of Nijad. He then turned his attention to the Hijaz. So if everybody remembers, and we'll have maps throughout here, I just don't have it on this page, that the Nijad was like Central Arabia, and the Hijaz was the west side where Mecca and Medina are. Finally conquering the Hijaz in 1926, just months before the British protectorate ended. For the next 5.5 years, he administered the two parts of his dual realm, the kingdom of Hijaz and Nijad, as separate units. So he managed them separately. And then by 1932, he's going to unite them. Ibn Saud had disposed of all of his main rivals and consolidated his rule over much of the Arabian Peninsula. He united his dominions into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that year. So in 1932, he's united these two and brought them together as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Ibn Saud's father, Abdul Rahman, retained the honorary title of Ayman. In 1937, near Dammam, American surveyors discovered what later proved to be Saudi Arabia's vast oil reserves. Before the discovery of oil, many family members were destitute. So they were actually searching out for water, and what they found was oil.
The Americans?
Yes. Well, they were searching for them. If I understood it correctly, they were searching for them, helping them searching for water. The Saudis were, and the Americans were doing that. I don't know if it was doing that for them. I don't remember if they were doing it for them, but I think it was. And but it was in that search for water that they found oil. Ibn Saud sired dozens of children by many wives. He had 4. In the Quran, you could only have up to 4 wives at a time. So he had at most 4 wives at the time, divorcing many times. He made sure to marry into many noble clans. So we see the marriages going on, and these were the ones that were their enemies as well, that they would marry, make these mergers with and treaties with, etc. So divorcing many times. He made sure to marry into many noble clans and tribes within his territory, including the chiefs of Bani Khalid, Ajman, and Shemar tribes, as well as the Al-Ashik descendants of Muhammad. This is Wahhab. So you see the marriage is still happening with the Wahhabis. He also arranged for his sons and relatives to enter into similar marriages. So you've got that going to continue to go on, but they would continue to be into these similar marriages. He appointed his eldest surviving son, Saud, as heir apparent to be succeeded by the next eldest son, Faisal. The Saudi family became known as the royal family, and each member, male and female, was accorded the title Emir, Prince, or Amira, Princess, respectively. Ibn Saud died in 1953, having cemented an alliance with the United States in 1945. So there's this alliance with the United States made with Roosevelt, I believe it was. He is still celebrated officially. Was it Roosevelt? Yeah, we'll go through here eventually. I think it was Roosevelt. He is still celebrated officially as the founder, and only his direct descendants may take on the title of his or her Royal Highness. The date of his recapture of Riyadh in 1902 was chosen to mark Saudi Arabia's centennial in 1999, according to the Islamic lunar calendar. Upon Ibn Saud's death, his son Saud assumed the throne without incident, but his lavish spending led to a power struggle with his brother, Crown Prince Faisal. In 1964, the royal family forced Saud to abdicate in favor of Faisal, aided by an edict from the country's Grand Mufti. During this period, some of Ibn Saud's younger sons, led by Talib ibn Abdulaziz, defected to Egypt, calling themselves the Free Princes and calling for liberalization and reform, but were later induced to return by Faisal. They were fully pardoned, but were also barred from any future positions in the government. Faisal was assassinated in 1975 by a nephew, Faisal ibn Musaid, who was promptly executed. Another brother, Khalid, assumed the throne. The next prince in line had actually been Prince Muhammad, but he had relinquished his claim to the throne in favor of Khalid, his only full brother. Somebody have something to say? Comment? No? Khalid died of a heart attack in 1982 and was succeeded by Saud, the eldest of the powerful Sadari Seven, so-called, because they were all sons of Ibn Saud by his wife, Hafsa al-Sadari. So these ones all came from the same mother and father. Saud did away with the previous title of His Majesty and replaced it with the honorific custodian of the two holy mosques. And that's Mecca and Medina, in reference to the holy Islamic holy sites, Mecca and Medina. A stroke in 1995 left Saud largely incapacitated. His half-brother, Crown Prince Abdullah, who was descended on the maternal side from the rival Rashid, this was one of the enemies, gradually took over most of the king's responsibilities until Saud's death in August 2005. Abdullah was proclaimed king on the day of Saud's death and promptly appointed his younger brother, Sultan bin Abdulaziz, the Minister of Defense and Saud's second deputy prime minister, as the new heir apparent. On the 27th of March 2009, Abdullah appointed Prince Naif, interior minister, as his second deputy prime minister and crown prince on 27th of October. So the crown prince, if I understood it correctly, and I've been trying to get these titles down a little bit more, but you have the king, but then you have the crown prince. The crown prince is the one that's going to be king when the king is gone. I don't know if anybody else has that more better understood, but the way I've been understanding it is you have the crown prince is the one that's going to be king, but he's acting as king while the other king is still alive. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm still trying to piece together.
I think he's king in training.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, he might be acting king because if I remember right, the current one is. I was trying to look into that more after last week. Is when they're incapacitated, that the crown prince will do the duties of king.
Right, but I don't think typically that the crowned prince does the duties. I think that's just because in this case, I think Solomon is having a hard time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's just the next person in line that's been like it's been voted in that okay, when the king dies, the crown prince is going to be the next one in line. But I think in this case, it's different that I think he is doing the duties because of
yeah. I've seen that in some of these when I've gone into more details of it that they will be acting king when the current king becomes incapacitated.
Yeah.
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 But they're just the title crown prince is they are king, and way back at the beginning there was a little chart that showed the list of things that they were, and the crown prince was listed as the king of Saudi Arabia.
Oh, okay, cool.
So I was looking at that in the review, and if you remind me when we get done, I'll go back to it and show you that. So yeah, they're probably in training, but they may be actually managing the affairs. I guess it depends on the circumstances. So let's see. Sultan died October 2011, while Naif died in Geneva, in Switzerland, on the 15th of June 2012. On the 23rd of January 2015, Abdullah died after a prolonged illness, and his half-brother, Crown Prince Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, was declared the new king. Many princes and government officials have been arrested in 2017 in alleged anti-corruption campaign by the king and crown prince. United States President Trump has expressed support for their arrest. Due to its authoritarian, this is where we left off, due to its authoritarian and quasi-theocratic rule, the House of Saud has attracted much criticism during its rule of Saudi Arabia. There have been numerous incidents, including the Wahhabi Ikhwan militia uprising during the reign of Ibn Saud. Osama bin Laden, the critic of the US, was a critic of Saudi Arabia and was denationalized in the mid-1990s. On November 20th, 1979, the Grand Mosque seizure in 1979 we know is a significant date. We have the Iranian Revolution taking place, and that's going to eventually become the Iran-Iraq War when Iraq invades Iran. So on November 20th, 1979, the Grand Mosque seizure saw the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca violently seized by a group of 500 heavily armed and provisioned Saudi dissidents led by Juman al-Ottabi. And I put down here who that was. Is a tribe originating in Saudi Arabia. Many members of the Saudi royal family descend maternally from the tribe, which is distributed throughout Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. The Ottabi are descended from the Bedouin. They trace back to the Madur family, which was way back before the first phase of the House of Saud, belonged to the Qays Allied Confederacy through its previous name. Okay, so a little extra, and you can read up on that. All these links are accessible if you open up the PowerPoint yourself as well. Let's see. But also of the peninsular Arabs and few Egyptians enrolled in Islamic studies at the Islamic University of Medina. The Saudi royal family turned to the ulema. If you remember, the ulema were the religious trained ones, the scholars, who duly issued a fatwa permitting the storming of the holy sanctuary by Saudi forces. So they're actually the religious scholars are actually writing a document that is giving them okay to go storm the holy sanctuary by Saudi forces, aided by French and Pakistani special ops units. According to Lawrence Wright, the GIGN commandos did convert to Islam. Most of those responsible, including al-Ottabi himself, were beheaded publicly in 4 cities in Saudi Arabia. In January 2016, Saudi Arabia executed the prominent Shiite cleric Sheikh Nimr, who had called for pro-democracy demonstrations, along with 47 other Saudi Shia citizens sentenced by the Specialized Criminal Court on terrorism charges. So this Sheikh, the Shiite cleric that was killed, I think we talked about that last week. In one of the videos that we were watching, I might have shared the video, and I don't recall which one it was right off the top of my. Oh, it was the newest one, I think, by Frontline. Was it? I'll have to find it later if I didn't send it to you last time. But there was the son was actually arrested, and as far as I know, he's still in prison. But in 2016, they actually executed his father, and this was. Democracy is speaking against, because you're not to speak against the Saudis, and they were speaking against the Saudis. And with all the revolution, Arab Spring that was going on, Saudi Arabia as well, just like Saddam Hussein, feared that spirit of revolution would come to them, and they didn't want to let that happen. Since May 2017, in response to protests against the government, the predominantly Shia town, because there are Shiites in Saudi Arabia, has been put under full siege by the Saudi military. Residents are not allowed to enter or leave, and military indiscriminately shells the neighborhoods with airstrikes, mortar, and artillery fire, along with snipers shooting residents. Dozens of Shia civilians were killed, including a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old child. The Saudi government claims it is fighting terrorists in Al-Awamiyah, this Shiite town. They claim that they're killing terrorists, but what they're actually doing is trying to keep they want to keep the Shiites from bringing in democracy and bringing in the spirit of revolution. Let's see here. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman kept his own mother away from his father for more than 2 years out of the fear that she would stop the king from giving the power to him. Princess Fahada bint Fala al-Hathlim, third wife of King Salman, was said to be in America for medical treatment. However, according to American intelligence, this was refuted, stating that she was not in the country. Some royals have been criticized for various human rights violations, including the death of Jamal Khashoggi, treatment of workers, and the Yemen war. The Reuters reported on the 23rd June 2020, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of allegedly threatening and intimidating a former intelligence officer, Saeed al-Jabri, along with his family of adult children, of returning to Saudi Arabia from exile in Canada. Saud was a longtime aide to the former Crown Prince, Prince Mohammed bin Nayef, whose Prince Salman ousted in 2017. The official allegedly has access to documents containing information sensitive and pivotal for the Crown Prince's leadership. So there's infighting as well as there was in the second stage, the second phase as well. Okay, so this one is kind of a long, lengthy. There are several pages of it, and maybe for time, we'll read some of the highlights, just kind of tracing back. It's a timeline, some of what we just read, but some key factors that I want to go, maybe just the bold and especially the highlighted, to show these events. And there's a link here that you could go to, or just, I pretty much had everything on here. I was really having a hard time trying to figure out what to actually cut out. So that's why I kind of distinguished some of it that was probably more critical. So in 1774, you got the Al-Saud will endorse Al-Wahhab's austere form of Islam. And in return, the Al-Saud, House of Saud, will get political legitimacy and regular ties from the Al-Wahhab's followers. The religious political alliance that Al-Wahhab and Saud forged endures to this day in Saudi Arabia. 1902, you've got the 22-year-old Abdulaziz ibn Saud captures Riyadh, the ancient capital of Saudi Kingdom. But to conquer all of the Arabian Peninsula, he seeks the help of nomadic Bedouins, the Ikhwan, or Muslim brothers. Renowned warriors, the Ikhwan, are also fervent Wahhabi Islamic Puritans who want to spread the form of Islam throughout the Middle East. That's 1902, that they want to have this, still have this merged together. 1924 to 1925, when with the Irkwan by his side, he captures Mecca in 1924 and Medina in 1925. So he's using the Wahhabis in this bond to be able to conquer Mecca and Medina, becoming the ruler of the two holy cities of Islam. But the Irkwan want to spread Wahhabism beyond Arabia, and when Abd al-Aziz tries to restrain them, they rebel. So they want to spread Wahhabism, and Saudi Arabia wants to keep it within. And so when they try to spread it, they rebel against, when the Saudi Arabia king, Abd al-Aziz, tries to restrain them, they rebel. So the Wahhabis are going to rebel. To survive, Abd al-Aziz realizes he has to destroy the Irkwan. But how can he, a defender of Islam, justify going to war against his Muslim warriors? Abd al-Aziz seeks the approval of the ulama, that's the religious scholars, the religious authorities, regarded as the moral guardians of the realm. With the ulama's endorsement, he crushes the Ikhwan, I think it's this Ikhwan. 1932, Abd al-Aziz ibn Saud, and this was the one that, it's the same name if I'm understanding correctly. Ibn Saud is Abdul Aziz. It's just spelled different there. Declares himself king and gives his name to the country, Saudi Arabia. To keep his new kingdom united, he marries a daughter from every tribe, as well as from the influential clerical families, more than 20 wives, although never more than 4 at a time, according to the Quran. These unions produce 45 legitimate sons and an unknown number of daughters. Daughters aren't counted in Saudi Arabia. Abdulaziz then begins consolidating power away from the brothers and cousins who helped him conquer the peninsula in favor of his own sons. Every Saudi king since has been a son of Abdulaziz ibn Saud. 1933, Saudi Arabia and the United States established diplomatic relations. And in 1933, the first foreign oil prospectors arrived in the kingdom. The Americans pay $170,000 in gold for land concessions that turn out to contain the biggest oil fields on earth. Ignoring criticism that inviting foreigners into the kingdom is un-Islamic, and citing precedent in the Quran, King Abdulaziz invites U.S. oil companies to develop Saudi oil resources. The oil companies and the Saudi government set up a joint enterprise that later becomes the Arabian American Oil Company, Aramco. Its shareholders include America's 4 largest oil corporations. I thought that was interesting because these are things that I never knew. But so they have the oil, but if I'm understanding correctly, did they not have the technology to be able, the ability to develop these fields?
I don't know the answer, but I was thinking the same thing as you, because I was like, why wouldn't they do it themselves?
Right.
So I'm thinking they just didn't have the ability to build the oil rigs or whatever.
And you can kind of see how this, in one way, it certainly enriched them. But when you come to the Wahhabis and the puritanical religious force, the Islamic extremism, they don't want all this. They want to live like nomads in the desert. So it brings up a union between the United States and the Saudis that right off the bat is going to cause a problem with the religious extremists. By 1945, the U.S. urgently needs oil facilities to help supply forces fighting in the Second World War. Meanwhile, security is at the forefront of King Abdulaziz's concerns. President Franklin Roosevelt invites the king to meet him aboard the USS Quincy, docked in the Suez Canal. The two leaders cement a secret oil for security pact. The king guarantees to give the U.S. secure access to Saudi oil And in exchange, the U.S. will provide military assistance and training to Saudi Arabia and build the Dhahran military base. Also discussed at the meeting is the issue of creating a Jewish homeland in Palestine. King Abdulaziz acknowledges the plight of the Jews, but argues taking part of Palestine is unfair to the Palestinians. In a letter to the king that Roosevelt sends after their meeting, the president writes, "I will take no action which might prove hostile to the Arab people." But Roosevelt dies shortly after sending this letter, and Vice President Harry Truman becomes president. 1947, Prince Faisal, the king's second son, arrives in New York for the UN vote on the partition of Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. The Saudis are dead set against it. Prince Faisal is promised by General George Marshall, one of President Truman's top aides, that the US will vote against the proposal. When Truman decides to support Palestine's partition, Prince Faisal takes this as a personal affront. In 1948, and somebody's probably better with this than I am, isn't this is the same time the Jews were sent back, right? Because Truman was the one that sent them back, right? Well, I'm glad I'm not alone in that, but yeah, I think it is. Right after the war, right? And everybody's wondering what to do with the Jews, And then it's Truman that Truman decides to support Palestine's partition. Prince Faisal takes this as a personal affront. In 1948, King Abdulaziz sends Saudi forces to join an unsuccessful effort to destroy the nascent Jewish state. Saudi Arabia has since never officially recognized Israel and is technically still at war with it. And this is Faisal. 1950.
Could you go over that last one again?
I'm
just trying to understand. Yeah.
When Truman decides to support Palestine's partition, and that's why I was asking.
What's the partition?
The dividing of Palestine.
Oh,
to be able to put the Jews would have a part and the Arabs would have a part.
Right.
And Saudis don't want the Jews in Palestine. And he was promised by General George Marshall, one of the President Truman's top aides, that the US will vote against it. But instead, Truman decides to support the partition. This is a UN vote. Truman decides to support the partition. Prince Faisal takes this as a personal affront. Is that good?
Yes, makes sense.
Okay. Because I'm still trying to understand my own self. Things that are so basic probably to some people are not basic to me because I never paid attention to any history. But
Amen, me too.
But to understand the whole issue of Israel being there and the hatred that is all it. I mean, I know there are a lot of different reasons, but the individual entities and their hatreds towards Israel. But that, if I remember right, that's the time, and I'm pretty sure it was Truman. Again, I get an F in history. It was Truman that sent the Jews back home to their homeland after the Holocaust. So 1953, before his death, in 1953, King Abdulaziz designates his eldest son, Prince Saud, the next king, and appoints his second son, Prince Faisal, Minister of Foreign Affairs. So I think from what I've been reading too, there would always be two that would be put in place. I saw that as a trying to remember where I saw it. I think it has to do with Salman now, but there's not two in place. And I'm trying to remember where it might have been one of the videos I saw that, but everyone will know as a sign basically when he puts a number two person in place that he's ready to abdicate or the next king will take over. That's a rough way of saying what I remember hearing. So they generally always have two in place. So Prince Faisal is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but Prince Saud will prove an ineffective ruler. His reign will be marked by inattention to governance and the misuse of money. And we read about him just in the previous slide before we got to the timeline. So Faisal winds up taking over. That's when they got the Ulam to write the fatwa to have him removed because he was mismanaging the affairs of the Saudi kingdom. So in 1957, the Middle East balance of power shifts from Gamal Abdel Nasser's overthrow of Egypt's king in 1952. Nasser proclaims himself a pan-Arabist, a secular socialist, and allies himself with the Soviet Union against the West. Nasser also wants Saudi oil under his control, saying it belongs to all Arab people. So this is Egypt. Balance power, overthrow Egypt's king in 1952. Nasser proclaims himself a pan-Arabist. He invites the Saudis and comes into an alliance here with the Soviet Union against the West. And he wants oil. So you see this involvement, this is during the Cold War, you see this involvement of the Soviet Union and then the involvement of the United States wanting to have control over the Middle East by proxy. The US moves to shore up support for Saud. President Eisenhower invites him for a state visit in February 1957. Eisenhower wants to renew the lease on the Dhahran, is that how you say that? Dhahran Air Base, a useful strategic asset in the Cold War. So again, back in the period, this is the period of the Cold War, but they needed that base. The United States wanted that base. It was a strategic asset. Saud wants the money that the US will pay to extend the lease, and he privately promises to suspend all aid to Egypt. To this day, the agreement that Faisal and Eisenhower signed constitutes the basis of US-Saudi military cooperation. That was 1957. But Saud soon spends the revenues from the Dhahran lease on luxury trips to Europe and falls out of favor with his own family. They make, and I've seen this in several of the videos, they spend a lot of their time in Europe gambling and just blowing money, from what I understood. So if you take from being nomads in the desert to suddenly all this money, it's interesting to see that money does corrupt. But anyways, he's the one that's mismanaging money. 1958 to 1959, in the late 50s, one of King Abdulaziz's younger sons, Prince Talal, begins a movement for political reform in the kingdom. In 1958, he drafts a new Saudi constitution to establish a national consultative council, a first step towards establishing a constitutional monarchy. But his proposal is rejected by King Saud, and in 1961, he is forced from his position as transportation minister. From exile in Egypt and Lebanon, Prince Talal announces the establishment of a royal opposition group comprised of some of his full brothers and other well-educated Saudis. It is nicknamed the Free Princes. They continue to lobby for political reform, but without success. In 1964, by the early 60s, King Saud is losing support everywhere and has brought the country to the brink of economic collapse. The senior Al-Saud brothers realize something has to be done and arrive at the consensus to replace Saud with a more capable leader. They go to the ulama, which we read, the religious authorities get the fatwa, and they all go in favor of King Faisal, his half-brother, Prince Faisal, to be king. King Saud and his entourage quietly leave the country, and the alien monarch spends his last years exiled in Athens, Greece, where he dies in 1969. So now you have King Faisal. He begins a program of bringing the kingdom up to date. This is 64 to 75, stressing economic development and educational improvements. During his reign, oil revenues increased by more than 1,600%, enabling Faisal to build a communications and transportation infrastructure and set up a generous system of welfare benefits for all citizens. Even today, Saudi citizens do not pay taxes, but almost every aspect of modernization brings the king into conflict with the religious establishment. For the ulama, innovation threatens Islam. To appease the conservatives, King Faisal allows Saudi Arabia to become a sanctuary for extremist Muslims from Egypt and Syria, where the governments are cracking down on fundamentalist scholars and professionals. Faisal invites them to teach Saudi Arabia's youth. So you can see this compromise this is where you're going to have the Wahhabism being taught in the schools. His decision will have far-reaching consequences. Many of today's Saudi radicals studied under Egyptian and Syrian fundamentalists. Partly due to his standing as a pious Muslim, Faisal is able to introduce cautious social reforms such as female education. In 1965, he approves the first television broadcast inside the kingdom, and there was battles with that too. But the first television broadcast they did was a recitation of the Quran. Nonetheless, religious conservatives stage a large protest. When a nephew of the king is killed at the protest and clashes with the police, the king does nothing to punish the policeman. This decision will later have disastrous consequences. And we'll see that as we go forward. So another point to remember that this nephew is killed by the police and he does nothing about it. 1967, in the spring, war is brewing. President Nasser of Egypt moves troops to Israel's border, and orders the UN out. Uniting against Israel, Faisal reconciles with Nasser. Fearing an attack as imminent, Israel launches a massive preemptive war. In just 6 days, the bulk of Arab armies are destroyed and Arab leaders are humiliated. At Aramco's compounds, hundreds of Saudis riot against the United States. The Arab League pressures King Faisal to use Saudi oil as a weapon against the West. So, it's like you want to try to support all sides or more than one side, and it doesn't go well when the two sides that you're wanting to defend and support are enemies. In 1973, October, another Arab-Israeli war breaks out. Despite growing tensions, the Arab attack on Israel comes as a surprise. In the first day, Egyptian and Syrian armies gained considerable ground. In the midst of the war, the US airlifts supplies to Israel. So remember that they're allies of Saudi Arabia, but here they are giving supplies to Israel. The Arab League pressures Faisal for an oil boycott, and Faisal acts, ordering Aramco to stop pumping. With Saudi oil kept off the market, world oil prices quadruple. President Nixon sends Secretary of State Henry Kissinger on an urgent mission to meet with Faisal. The Pentagon begins considering military options. Kissinger says oil is a national security priority, and if necessary, the US will intervene militarily. With the oil embargo having a major impact on the war in Vietnam, a secret solution is devised. King Faisal agrees to arrange for Saudi oil to be covertly supplied to the US Navy. The oil embargo officially ends in 1974. So, the Vietnam War, they need oil to be able to move their ships and military. A lot goes on. And I know there was a question about Kissinger as well, because he's a Jewish one. That comes up, I think, in a little bit here. In 1975, the morning of March 25th, King Faisal's past catches up with him. This is where the nephew that got shot by the police and he did nothing about it. At a meeting with Kuwait's petroleum minister, one of the king's nephews, Faisal ibn Musaid, slips into the room. His brother had been killed by the police at the 1965 protest against the introduction of television. Ibn Masud shoots and kills the king. The assassination comes as a violent shock, especially because the killer is a member of the royal family. As his father had decreed, King Faisal is succeeded by half-brother Prince Khalid, who becomes the fourth king of Saudi Arabia. 1975 to 79. During the reign of King Khalid, hundreds of billions in oil revenue pours into Saudi Arabia. The tiny population, estimated at 4 million, and with only 500,000 literate males, finds it hard to absorb such wealth. The government begins a frenzied pace of buying and building. Foreign contractors flood in. Among those accumulating massive riches during these years are the bin Ladens, principal builders of the Al-Saud royal family. The boom also leads to widespread official corruption. Deals are riddled with influence peddling, bribes, and oversized commissions. The Saudi royals, with their huge allowances, become notorious big spenders in Europe's casinos. Saudi leaders lose the credibility and respect of the country's religious conservatives. So now you got a problem there. Got a problem with the religious conservatives because of the way that they're living their life with all this money. We also see that this is where the bin Laden family gets its wealth. And also keep in mind that when they brought in the Egyptian and Syrian fundamentalists to teach that this is where Wahhabism was being taught, and Osama bin Laden was taught in these schools. So this is what the children were actually educated on in Wahhabism, part of the education system. In 1979, one of Saudi Arabia's most shocking events occurs the morning of November 20th, 1979. Several hundred Saudi fundamentalists take over, so they're rebelling now, take over the Al-Harim, the great mosque at Mecca, and the holiest site in Islam. The leader of the insurgents is Juhayman al-Utabi, a direct descendant of the Ikhwan, the Wahhabi warriors who helped the Al-Saud family take power in the early 1920s. The radicals call for a return to pure Islam and a reversal of modernization. Juhayman also accuses the royal family of corruption and says they have lost their legitimacy because of their dealings with the West. The royal family again turns to the ulama, the religious leaders of Saudi Arabia, and clerics issue a fatwa based on the verses of the Quran that allows the government to use all necessary force to retake the Great Mosque. The standoff lasts for several weeks before the Saudi military can remove the insurgents. More than 200 troops and dissidents are killed in the attacks, and to set an example, over 60 of the zealots are publicly beheaded in their hometowns. So I don't know about everybody else, but to me, I find it really amazing there's no surprise, I guess, to say, I don't know, the rise of bin Laden, but I never understood that it was within, they have the very same challenges between conservative, and we've been seeing that, conservative and liberal, so to speak. I don't know if you want to call them liberal, but they're, well, I guess it is. They're in Europe gambling away their money and blowing their money the way they are. But you have within the church-state faction, and the church rises up when the state gets too liberal. Is that a safe way to say that? But at the same time, you have them allied with the West, who the conservative side hates. It's like you have, I've seen it in other things more recent, but at an overall big scale, it's like this perfect storm is being, trying to think of the right word to put it. This point of coming to a perfect storm is being developed, whether it be Saudi Arabia, the Sunnis, the Wahhabis, or whether it be Iran and the issues they have there, whether it be Syria. It's like all of these things are coming together, and all of these things in the history that we're going through are parts of what brought about this development to bring us to this point where we're about to have this perfect storm. If that made sense. Everything coming to a head. So in 1979, shaken by the seizure of the Great Mosque by radical fundamentalists, the royal family moves to increase its religious standing and starts implementing a more Islamist agenda. They begin pumping millions into religious education under the ulama. So they want to come back in and be good with the Islamist agenda here more so. So they're going to pump millions into religious education under the ulama. Saudi charities raise even more. New theological schools and universities are built to produce large numbers of clerics who teach Wahhabism as the only true form of Islam and preach jihad against infidels is the obligation of every true believer. This same year, the Wahhabis find a rallying cause like no other. The Soviet Union, the godless communist power, invades the Muslim nation of Afghanistan. Saudi Arabia and the United States make a secret deal to contribute equal amounts to finance the Afghan war against the Soviets. Thousands of young Saudis are sent to fight alongside the Mujahideen in Afghanistan for the next decade. Some 45,000 young Saudi volunteers will trek to Afghanistan, where they acquire military skills and come to believe that dedicated Islamic fighters can defeat a superpower. One of their leaders is Osama bin Laden. So you have, let me reread that. The thousands of young Saudis are sent to fight alongside the Mujahideen in Afghanistan for the next decade. Some 45,000 young Saudi volunteers will trek to Afghanistan, where they acquire military skills and come to believe that dedicated Islamic fighters can defeat a superpower. So I'm still trying to understand, because the 1979, you have the Iranian Revolution, and then you have Iraq invade Iran, you've got the Iran-Iraq war. But at the same time, you have going on the war in Afghanistan. Is that correct? Anybody?
I think that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm
Sister
trying to
Elaine.
keep it all straight because each one of these is a different, and I think it's just been recent that I started to realize I might study them separately and realize that, you know, this is this one and that was that one, but I didn't realize they were both at the same time.
Yeah, my question is, what was the United States doing in Afghanistan? Were they training
Well, it says that they were equally
forces
funding.
there?
It says that the Saudi Arabia and the U.S. make a secret deal to contribute equal amounts to finance the Afghan war against the Soviets.
I remember in the 1980s hearing a lot about the U.S. supplying Stinger missiles, anti-aircraft missiles, to Afghanistan, helping the Mujahideen shoot down Soviet helicopters and airplanes.
I think I remember that too. So again, you go back to the, if you look at it from the, pull back the scope and look at it, the United States and Saudis and others, they don't want communism in there. And I thought it was interesting that before they were even the Soviet Union, but back as early as 1918, Russia was trying to bring itself into the Middle East. So, and that goes even further back in history. But that was one place that I was reading, one of the articles that I was reading, trying to get into the history of Russia a little bit more, because this whole thing is about the King of the North and the King of the South. And so you have here the King of the North and his allies wanting to keep the King of the South out of the Middle East, out of Afghanistan. And so just to continue that, to keep that thought, I need to keep that thought always in my mind. But out of this, it comes Osama bin Laden. And we now see the schools here as well. They were teaching already. They made a deal earlier with the Egyptian and Syrian fundamentalists, and they were teaching them these things. Now you got Wahhabism. So I might have misstated that. I don't know I don't remember if the Egyptian and Syrian, they just said religious fundamentalists. But you have Wahhabism, which is, let's see, the only true form of Islam and preach jihad against infidels is the obligation of every true believer. So, okay, late 70s and early 80s. In the wake of Ayatollah Khomeini's bitterly anti-American Shia fundamentalist revolution in Iran and the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan, the United States and Saudi Arabia strengthened their security relationship. Rising oil revenues allow the Saudis to increase military expenditures at all levels. So 1979 was the Iranian Revolution, where the Shah is exiled and soon after dies, and Khomeini was a Shiite cleric who is welcomed back into Iran. And at the same time, you have Iraq, Saddam Hussein, who is fearful of that revolution spilling over into the Shiite population in Iraq. So he takes advantage of the disarray that he thinks that Iran is in with this transition and attacks Iran, and that begins the Iran-Iraq war. So, and that's for another study. We have those notes coming up as well. So 1982, this is during the Iran-Iraq war and also during the Afghanistan war. King Khalid dies after a short illness and is succeeded by his half-brother, Crown Prince Fahd. The new king will face economic constraints as oil prices decline in the late 80s. Just as Fahd takes power, war breaks out between his two powerful neighbors, Iran and Iraq, which we were just talking about. Fahd befriends Saddam Hussein, a fellow Sunni, and gives him money. So the king, Saudi Arabia, is going to give money. They're both Sunnis. He's going to give money and support Saddam Hussein to battle the Shia in Iran. But 2 years after the war ends, Saddam will invade neighboring Kuwait with his eye on Saudi oil. So Saudi Arabia helps Saddam Hussein, but then when it's all done and over, he turns against Saudi. And I'm not watching the time. I know everybody, there was a few that would like to take a break partway through. Let's finish this slide and then we'll take like a 5-minute break. So 1990 to 91, August 2nd, 1990, Iraq invades Kuwait and moves its troops towards the border of Saudi Arabia. Osama bin Laden visits members of the royal family and offers his Afghan-trained mujahideen to help fight Iraq, but they don't take his offer seriously. So you've got back in the Afghanistan war with Osama bin Laden being the leader there in all of his training. He wants to bring the mujahideen to help fight Iraq. King Fahd turns to his US allies for help, but can he, the defender of the two mosques of Mecca and Medina, invite hundreds of thousands of non-Muslim infidel troops into the kingdom? Once again, the royal family turns to the ulama for a ruling or a fatwa. With their approval, over 500,000 US troops arrive in Saudi Arabia and neighboring countries. So we know that that makes bin Laden and the extreme religious sect angry again, because you're bringing the West in. 1991, with US women soldiers in many parts of the kingdom because of the Gulf War, Saudi women, I thought this was interesting too, Saudi women decide to challenge restrictions on their rights, including the right to drive. So they see women in the military and they want to start getting their rights. So we know that we're looking at, in the message of equality, racism, sexism, and homophobia. So here you have the West coming in and women are in the military fighting, and you have the Saudi women wanting to rise up. and they want to challenge restrictions on their rights, including the right to drive. In November, 47 Saudi women meet at the parking lot at Safeway and drive their cars through the streets of Riyadh. The women are arrested by the religious police, but released the same night under the orders of Prince Salman. The governor of Riyadh, the ulama calls their driving a depravity and issues the names and numbers of all 47 women, urging clerics to punish the women as they see fit. The Al-Saud royal family publicly reasserts the ban on women drivers. So we'll take a 5-minute break and be right back.
Are you getting off, Sister Elaine?
No, I'm gonna leave it on. I just paused
Okay.
the recording. And
Okay.
I'm not gonna disconnect, I'm just gonna leave it.
Okay, because I want to ask some questions because my Wi-Fi seems to be better. So I missed some of the explanation.
Oh,
So I want to ask a few questions.
do you want to now or take the break and then come back?
Oh, I can now, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So when the Saudis and the Americans were working together back in 1979, and then they agreed to work together because of the oil. It's like both parties were being benefited, the Saudis and the Americans. And I guess, and then the follow-up to that would be, is that why they decided to war against the Soviet Union? Because they didn't want the Soviet Union to come in and so basically were they protecting money? I guess that's what I'm getting at.
I hate to do this to you, but I need you to go through that just again. You guys can still.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. It's partly my fault. You can still see the screen, right?
Yes, I can see the screen.
Okay, because I thought I did pause the recording, and I think it's recording. Does it still say it's recording on your end?
Oh, not on my end, no.
Okay, I'm gonna have to figure that
Well, I
out.
have an iPad. So I don't even know
I
if
see it. It says it's recording.
Okay, it is. Okay, good. So I'm sorry, Richard. Go through that again. I thought I messed up.
Okay, no, I apologize. I'm sure I'm not being clear. So can you go back to the previous slide? I think
Yeah.
that's where my Wi-Fi started cutting out. So I could see everything. I just couldn't hear
This one?
conversation. No, the one prior to 1979.
Yeah, this is, it goes back here. Is that what you're
Oh, this is where we were?
This is 79.
Okay. Okay, I didn't even notice we had turned. Okay. So yeah, so why were the Americans there in the first place at that time? Was it because of, were they still working with the Saudis on the oil? I guess that's my first question.
In 1979, you mean?
Yes.
In 1979. Let me go back to where we're at here. They weren't there until what we just read, where they do get invited in later. They weren't there. They do have a base there. The Dhahran, is that how you say that word? Dhahran base? That they have there.
Mm-hmm.
But it was they were the promise, they made an exchange here, an agreement that in exchange for oil, they would be security.
Oh, where is that at? Which?
That was
that's
back,
under his name.
That was back a little while earlier.
Oh, okay. So security. Okay, got you.
They were there for security. Yeah, but from what I understand, from what I saw in some of the videos and some of the reading that I've been doing, they were there for security purposes. They had a base there, but within the base, they lived like American citizens. And they had everything that they would have, within that confines of that base. They had everything that would be American to them. But when they left the base, they had to live like Saudis.
Okay.
So there was this distinction, but they were not liked by the religious conservative ones. They don't like the West in there because the West brings in corruption. That's my choice of word. I don't know if it's right, but that's what it seems like. It brings to them, to the religious conservatives, the Islamic fundamentalists, it brings in corruption.
Mm-hmm.
So here it's interesting that the Saudis wind up, or the Middle East winds up with all the oil and all this wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to that verse in the Bible, that the love of money is the root of all evil. And So here they are basically poor to begin with, and then they discover the oil. And you look at the corruption that kind of leaves a trail along the way here. And bring it in the United States. They were angry to bring in the United States to begin with. But then they officially bring them in. Which one did we read it on? Right here in 1991, 90 to 91, when he turns to the Allies. And this was after the Afghanistan war, where Saudi and U.S., the Saudi state, the king had, and the U.S. both helped fund the Afghanistan war. That ends, Russia leaves, and then now you've got Iraq invading Kuwait. And also you have in 1982, we saw this, that the king befriends Saddam Hussein and he helps him. But then later, Saddam Hussein turns against him when he goes and attacks Kuwait. So Osama bin Laden comes in, who's back over here in 79. Osama bin Laden wants to bring the Mujahideen to help fight, but the king doesn't take them seriously, and instead he goes to the U.S. for help. So that brings in more angst, anger.
Right, pushing them further.
Within, because the state is going to the U.S. or the West for help instead of their own conservative Mujahideen force. Did that make sense?
Yes, I guess I'm trying to figure out partly why did they feel the need to go into Afghanistan together, because Saudi Arabia, is like you got Iraq and Iran in between them. So I'm just trying to figure out why Afghanistan?
From what I understand, in different wars, not just that one, is you have, when we're studying themes, I don't know if it's right to say it this way, but when you're like studying themes, the whole theme of the King of the North and the King of the South is this wanting to control the Middle East and Syria. And so throughout the history of the early 1900s all the way through, you see Russia in its different stages, and then during the Cold War when it's the USSR, that wants to also have its foothold in the Middle East. And so it was put to me, I think Brother Itabo put it this way in a message to me, that the United States wants to democratize the Middle East, and Russia supports Islamification. But from some of the other articles that I've read, Putin or Russia, the purpose of what they do, and I don't want to say it's not to be a superpower. I don't remember that part of it, but I remember catching that it's a competition. They just want to compete with the United States. So a lot of what they do is just to be competing against the United States. And they do want to be known on the scene as the superpower. But their motive seems to be wanting to be in competition against the United States for all that the United States has also done to Russia. So they want, if I'm understanding it correctly, with Afghanistan, they come together on the fact that neither Saudis or US wants the Soviet Union in the Middle East. If that helped answer your question. They did not want communism coming into the Middle East, although it was there in different factions, because you can see that in some of the other things that I've read as well, that there were factions of communism within. Even the Ba'ath Party had a communist faction, which I thought was interesting. I'm still trying to figure out. But that was the main thing, if I understood it correctly, was with the Afghanistan war, is to not let communism come into the Middle East. And they shared that, the United States and Saudis shared that desire, same desire. Did that help?
Yes, it helped because yeah, I forgot to connect the the thing with the King of the North and the King of the South. So that helped once you said that.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to see if I can't pause this and we'll take a 5-minute break. You guys back? Are you there?
I can hear you.
I was just thinking as well, for me, the reason it's also confusing is so many things that are going on at the same time. Like I said, just kind of earlier, realizing or connecting, knowing that you had the Iran-Iraq war, knowing that you had the war in Afghanistan, but not really connecting that they were both going on at the same time. So while the Saudis and the United States funded the Mujahideen to go in Afghanistan to push back the Soviet Union, at the same time, you have the Soviet Union and the United States, and I think the Saudis, pretty much everybody was backing Saddam Hussein in the Iran-Iraq war to keep out the Islamic fundamentalism that was being, that had taken over Iran with the Ayatollah Khomeini. So to me, that's why, that's one of the things, a lot of reasons it's confusing, but to me, that's an area where it confuses me too, because you have them as enemies, the King of the North and the King of the South as enemies, but they both were on Saddam Hussein's side in the fight against Iraq. And I don't have an answer for that, but I often go back to that scripture that in the book of Judges that's in there like 3 times, I think, that everybody did what they thought was right in their own mind, where they do what they think is right or what is best at the time and what benefits them, what is actually going to benefit them at the time. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
As you were speaking, I was thinking that the thought that came to my mind right before you said it was that both sides are mutually benefiting from this big time. Saudi Arabia gets, the new infrastructure and technology and the help and protection, and America gets the oil. So it just on a monetary aspect to keep up their goals of the United States keeping Russia out, and then the Sunnis are able to keep spreading their version of Islam and keeping the Sunnis down. So
Yeah,
keeping the Shiites down.
Yeah, and going back to earlier in the study where the Wahhabis want to spread that form of Islamic, Islamism? How do you say that word? I know Islamism. I try to say that word. I got a lot of words tongue-tied in my head. They want to spend that, spread Islamic fundamentalism, the Sunni Wahhabi teachings all around. The Wahhabis wanted to teach their puritanical teachings and spread it all over the world. And the House of Saud was wanting to keep it just, not, they didn't want to go that far. But there's so many different things involved because, and I presented a question to Brother Atabo earlier, I think sometime last week, I can't remember, but started to think about, multiple things, but with the 9/11, we talked about this before, what Elder Parmenter says about, shows that 9/11 being a harbinger of the close of probation. What does that really mean? And then all the different stories in the Bible that tell us that the enemies are going to wind up fighting themselves. We know that Islam, I'm going to ramble a little bit, I hope it makes sense. Islam is like an umbrella of protection for God's people to go and do the work. We see that when there's a restraint of Islam to go and do the work, but then Islam is a punishment or a scourge against Rome, or in this case, against modern Babylon, the United States, and Protestantism. And so I posed the question to him, do you think it's possible that the Shiites, maybe we said this on Wednesday, I can't remember, but that the Shiites and the Sunnis in the end come together. Because when you go back to the very beginning with Muhammad, there was no division. It wasn't until the next generation that you had that split. So if you're going to declare the end from the beginning, would that mean at the very end there'd be no split and they all unite, the radical Sunnis and the radical Shiites, would they all unite in what they do in the end? And then the other thing that we discussed was how much of this involves economics, perhaps, as opposed to a bloodbath. That in Revelation 18, it's all about the economy that's destroyed. So a lot of things still to be understood. That's just some of the stuff that I've been thinking about, and I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on any of that.
Well, I guess just as a random. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Somebody was speaking.
Just from your thoughts. On the line here, it shows late 70s, early 80s, and it kind of gives a summary of what was going on in 1979 with Afghanistan, the Russians, and Saudi Arabia, and of course, US. It's all about the money. It's about the oil. But it says here, maybe I'll just read this, because it kind of summarizes that in the wake of Ayatollah Khomeini's bitterly anti-American Shia fundamentalist revolution in Iran and the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan, the US and Saudi Arabia strengthened their security relationship. Rising oil revenues allow the Saudis to increase militarily their expenditures at all levels. So the money's behind it all that supports this. So as we were thinking about with Saudi Arabia, or with the Soviet Union and the United States and Afghanistan, it was all about not so much being enemies at that time, but building up, because they could see where the oil was going to take them. So that's kind of how I'm seeing it at this point. And as these years go by and this line extends, it shows more and more that that's the reason why that they were working together, especially in Afghanistan for years. For years, that was a very lengthy war. So I just wanted to give that thought out because it might clear up some thinking there too.
And the thoughts that I have on whether or not we'll be seeing, and we would be seeing it on a line. I mean, that's how the lines are directing us, but this is talking about the bitterly anti-American Shia fundamentalists. Well, you also have anti-American Sunni fundamentalists, right?
Yeah, Bin Laden.
Yeah, which then goes into ISIS. And there's only a couple more slides on this one, at least on Saudi Arabia, and then we're going to look at ISIS. And
Yeah, it seems like. Oh, go ahead, sister. I'm sorry.
go ahead.
Okay, I was just thinking. It seems like there's some good. As all this is coming clear in my mind, it seems like on the Sunni side, they are more concerned about the anti-Americans, about the purity of Islam being, messed up, and so that's why they will war against America, because the the other part of the Sunnis are, you know, they're walking in tow with America. But on the Shiite side, just like when we killed Soleimani earlier this year, it's like he was killed simply for just being Iranian, which is an enemy of, you know, Saudi Arabia, you know, the leadership of Saudi Arabia. So I guess mainstream Sunnis.
Yeah, he's one I haven't looked at yet, and he's on my list of things to look at. As you were speaking, you were bringing up something that made me think about maybe this is part of the difference between the two extremes. Is that and I don't know if this is accurate, but that the Sunni fundamentalists don't like the West and the riches, and they just want to be nomads and go back to pure Islam. But the Shiites, I think, from what Iran, with the Shah of Iran, they hated the West, and I think it was because of democracy. So are those two things that these two groups, I'm just thinking out loud and asking for your help. These two groups, one hates the West for its influence in taking away from their nomadic type life, and is the other, the Shiites, hatred towards the West because we instill democracy, and they don't want that either.
Yeah, it's a good thought. I wish I knew more about them, more about the culture. But I know I watched that Frontline documentary. I forget the name. What'd you say?
Bitter Rivals.
Oh, not Bitter Rivals. I think it was Once Upon a Time in Iraq or something like that.
Yeah.
So, but that thought doesn't work because it's Iraq. I was thinking about Iran, so never mind that thought. Sorry.
Well, Saddam Hussein at the same time, and you have the same thing happening there, where you had the Iranian Revolution that was they did away with a dictator, the Shah of Iran, but the Shah of Iran was supported by the United States. And so what they were bringing in was this pure Shiite religion that was extreme as well. And Saddam did not want that in Iraq. He's Sunni, but there's a considerable Shia population in Iraq, and he didn't want that to spread over to there. So it's interesting. I need to go back and watch Bitter Rivals again, because probably as I go through some of this stuff, and I could go back and probably understand more, probably the third or fourth time around, whatever it is, because I know I've heard it a few times. But yeah, to try to get a really better grasp of who's who and why they're doing what they're doing. But I do wonder, I did think about that, whether or not at the beginning with Muhammad, there was no division. There was Mohammedanism, Islam, the religion of Islam. And then after that is where came the split. And we went through that. It's something I probably need to go back and review my own self. It's in the Role of Islam notes that you guys all have. Go back to the beginning of that shows the Sunni Shia split. And I think that Bitter Rivals and the different videos show it as well. But I wonder if they don't wind up uniting in the end with a goal of against the West. So anyways, we'll finish. There's a couple more slides on this one or two, I don't remember. And then we're going to start looking at ISIS. So 1992, a group of 107 Wahhabi religious figures sends a 46-page memorandum of advice to King Fahd, criticizing the government for corruption and human rights abuses and for allowing US troops on Saudi soil. The document calls on the government to more strictly follow Sharia or Islamic law and ends relations with Western governments. So they're calling for the end of relationship. And it's kind of like, well, with everything being so entangled, how do you actually end that relationship? And that's what they're calling for.
I'm sorry, where are you at, sister? What year?
Right here, 1992.
That's not on my screen.
Oh, you guys,
Yeah, no, you did not move the slide.
you guys don't see the new slide. Let me go back then. Hang on one second.
Yeah.
Because I was looking at the slide, I was reading it. Okay, what do you see now?
Yes, now we see it.
Okay, that's weird. Okay. Probably something to do when I thought I messed up the recording. Okay, so there's 107 Wahhabis that write a 46-page memorandum, and they want, they call on the government to more strictly follow Sharia or Islamic law and end relations with Western governments. King Saud dismisses 7 of the 17 members of the ulama for refusing to denounce the memorandum. Amid calls for democratic reform, King Saud introduces the basic law of government, essentially the country's first written constitution. The first of the laws specifies that Saudi Arabia is a sovereign Arab Islamic state with a monarchy headed by the House of Saud. The Al-Saud's control of government remains tight, but the new laws make some concessions to reforms. For example, a consultative council of 60 members appointed by the king is created to interpret laws and make recommendations on matters of state. The laws also establish the first municipal governments in the country. That's 1992. 1994, following the government's arrest of 2 Wahhabi clerics for anti-government preaching, so they're speaking out against the government, several thousand protesters staged demonstrations in the town of Bereda. The clerics accused the monarchy of corruption and betraying Islam by allowing US troops on the Arabian Peninsula. The government admits to arresting over 100 protesters. Opposition groups claim thousands were seized. The incident ends up forcing the government to cede more control to the Wahhabi clerics, but only if the clerics promise to support the government. The 2 Wahhabi clerics are quietly released from prison in 1999. So how do you be friends with everyone at the same time when you're all in disagreement? So, or come into these agreements. So the Wahhabis, it's like the Saudi government is in between the Wahhabis and the US, and they have need or use of both. They need and want to use the United States. They need and want to use the Wahhabi clerics. But can you actually have it both ways? So in 1995, 4 years after the Gulf War, US troops are still in the kingdom. Osama bin Laden seizes on the issue and his followers go on the offensive. On the morning of November 13th, 1995, a massive bomb shakes the US-operated Saudi National Guard training center in Riyadh. 5 American military contractors and 1 US soldier are killed. Those arrested say they are inspired by bin Laden. So this eventually starts having attacks within, not attacks here, but attacks within. 1995 to 96, following a series of strokes in 1995 and 96, King Saud is no longer able to run the government, and Crown Prince Abdullah, Saud's half-brother, becomes the kingdom's de facto ruler. That would go back to what we were talking about earlier. He's no longer able to do the business of running things, and the Crown Prince is now going to be running things while he is yet still alive. 1996, on the morning of June 25th, 1996, a large truck bomb explodes at the US military residence in Tehran called Khobar Towers, killing 19 US servicemen. US law enforcement efforts to investigate the bombing are met with resistance by Saudi officials. 5 years later, a federal grand jury will indict 13 Saudis and 1 Lebanese man for the attack. In 1996, in his 1996 declaration of war against the Americans occupying the lands of the two holy places, Osama bin Laden calls on Muslims everywhere to fight the Jews and Crusaders. He also accuses the Saudi royal family of pocketing the national wealth. And we know that he winds up being, what was the word that they used? Is no longer a Saudi citizen. What's the word that they used? Maybe somebody remembers that.
Denaturalized, I think.
Yes, thank you. Denationalized him, yeah. Because he spoke out against them. 1996, Arab satellite television begins broadcasting throughout the region beyond the control of Saudi monarchy. For the first time, Saudi citizens see for themselves reports of their country's shortcomings, the lack of civil rights, political freedoms, royal corruption. Disturbing images of the Arab-Israeli conflict become part of Saudi's daily viewing. Throughout the 90s, U.S. efforts to forge a lasting peace in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are unsuccessful. When the Saudis sensed that the new U.S. President, George W. Bush, might abandon the peace process, they decided to take a more active role. August 2001, frustrated by what he sees as a continuing pro-Israel bias by the Bush administration and its predecessors, Crown Prince Abdullah sends an angry letter to President Bush on August 29, stating that if the U.S. does not behave in a more equitable manner toward the Palestinians, the Saudis will have to reconsider their long-standing alliance with the U.S. But before any measurable action can be taken on this complaint, the terrorist attacks of September 11th occur. September 11th, we know at the official level, the Saudi government is appalled by the terrorist attacks in the United States and publishes a statement calling them regrettable and inhuman. Although it is known almost immediately that 15 of the 19 hijackers in the Al-Qaeda plot are Saudi citizens, months pass before the Saudi government will admit it. America's subsequent war on terror in Afghanistan against Al-Qaeda deeply divides Saudis, but Saudi leaders quietly allow the US military to use Saudi air bases for command and control operations. Saudi militants captured in Afghanistan will make up the biggest segment of the population shipped to the prison camps in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So the Saudis, we're going to see that, they did not accept, we're in denial, I don't know what to call it, that they were actually responsible for what had happened. Their citizens were within Saudi Arabia. So in April 2003, just days after Baghdad falls to the US forces in Iraq, US Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld arrives in Riyadh to announce that US troops will pull out of Saudi air bases. For more than 10 years, the American presence in the land of the two holy mosques has been a rallying cry for Al-Qaeda. In May 2003, the fact that the US troops are withdrawing from the kingdom makes no difference to Al-Qaeda. On May 12, 2003, Al-Qaeda militants attacked 3 compounds in Riyadh that house hundreds of foreign workers. 35 people are killed, including 9 Americans. Over 100 are wounded. Shocked, Saudi society and the royal family begin to look inward to their question how their own citizens could be behind the attacks. So if I understood all this correctly, that they did not see 9/11 was came from the Saudis, and now they're coming to realize where it all comes from. So in 2004, early 2004, a group of prominent Saudi citizens, including attorney Basim Alim, petitioned the government for constitutional reforms. Prince Naif, the Minister of the Interior, meets with them and insists that the petition stop. Shortly after, many of the petitioners are arrested. In November of 2004, at Friday prayers, November 5th, 26 prominent Saudi clerics, including Sheikh Nasser al-Omar, son of Fadwa, saying that Iraqis should rise up and oppose the Americans in Iraq. Many interpret the fatwa as encouraging all Muslims to go fight the Americans. In December 2004, a young Saudi medical student travels to Mosul, Iraq, and detonates a bomb that kills 22 US soldiers. To date, an unknown number of Saudis have traveled to Iraq to join the insurgency. 2003 to 2005, from May 2003 to December 2004, some 100 people are killed in attacks by Al-Qaeda in Saudi Arabia. Westerners are a prime target. In the summer of 2004, a BBC cameraman is gunned down while filming in a Riyadh street. 2 days later, a US defense contractor is shot to death in his garage. A week later, another US defense worker is killed outside his home in Riyadh, and US engineer Paul Johnson is abducted by terrorists and seen being beheaded in a video that is put on the internet. In December 2004, an assault on the US consulate in Jeddah leaves 5 foreign staff dead. 2 weeks later, the Saudi Ministry of the Interior is car bombed. As of February 2005, thousands of Americans have pulled out of the kingdom, and British Airways has suspended flights to the country. On August 1, 2005, King Saud dies at the age of 82, and his half-brother Abdullah is officially named monarch. Today, King Abdullah and the Saudi royal family face the most severe challenge in its 100-year history and straining its oil for security alliance with the United States. Ultimately, the Saudis believe an oil-dependent America cannot afford Saudi Arabia's demise. The House of Saud believes it will survive. So, any comments? I don't know about questions, but any comments? We've traced, at least through prayerfully for profitable reasons here, the history of the House of Saud, as well as the role of Islam, the separation between Sunni and Shia, and looking at this through the perspective of the King of the North and the King of the South, and what they want in the region as well. And we can see, at least from this, the attacks on the US, if this is accurate to say, the attacks on the US, and not just on the US soil, but on US people, seem to come from the Wahhabi side of the Sunnis.
Yes, I was just trying to find out, was Osama bin Laden Wahhabi? I just can't remember if we had said it in here, and he was also. So that was what I already said. Well, he was trained in the Wahhabi schools early in life. I don't know if he remained Wahhabi.
Yeah, I know I saw in my reading somewhere, but it would be like so much that I'd have to go back and verify it. It was my understanding he came from the Wahhabi side of things, and he was trained in the schools of Wahhabism. And we'll see in this section here on the making of ISIS, because now you're going to have, that kind of takes us away from, not away completely from Al-Qaeda yet, but now you're going to go into Zarqawi and his relation with Al-Qaeda, and then how it went from Al-Qaeda to then be ISIS. And another study that I'm kind of working on a little bit is the United States and Saddam Hussein, because you can go back and find that 40 years ago, over the last 40 years, that the United States, way back in the beginning, he was actually on the CIA payroll to help the United States. So what I've been kind of gathering from all this, and I don't know all of the significance of it, other than just the fact that you see it, is that the United States brought about the rise of Saddam Hussein, 79 to 89. The United States brings about the rise of Al-Qaeda, 89 to 9/11. And then the United States is the cause and brings about the rise of ISIS. Which I thought was really interesting to think about. I haven't gotten any further than just those thoughts, but I think they all need to be laid out on a line, taking out some of the details and some of the points of that, and also then taking back and going and looking at the line of 1798 and start trying to take some of these lines and comparing and contrasting them. And prayerfully, these studies are, the history of it at least is helping someone. I don't feel qualified by no means, but to lay these lines out and compare and contrast them. Because in learning that, we'll then see, we'll be able to understand. We want to understand the end from the beginning. God wants us to know what is coming. And that's what the purpose of the lines are. To eventually have us catch up with the lines, to be able to not have to look back, but to be able to know what is happening, that we can warn people. So this next portion is on ISIS now. We went through Saudi Arabia and through Al-Qaeda. Now we're going to look at, as we transition from Al-Qaeda to ISIS. So
I wanted to make a comment.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, I noticed there it says, ultimately the Saudis believe an oil-dependent America cannot afford Saudi Arabia's demise. And but now we are becoming less dependent on oil. Isn't that the case now with Trump's policies? And he's kind of touted that we're less dependent on outside oil. And then yesterday, or the day, I think it was yesterday, there was something in the Bible thread about another thing that was signed to do. Oh yeah, here, former Army Delta Force officer, U.S. ambassador signed secretive contract to develop Syrian oil fields.
I saw that.
So, I wonder if that's going to make, affect, our close affiliation with the Saudis. I mean, if it's a way to become less dependent on them, And then when, we're expecting Panium to bring down what's going on with Russia and their plans to, pipe in oil to Europe, then that oil field will be maybe up for grabs or something as they lose power.
A lot going on.
Yeah, I just thought that all those things working out there that we can see the beginnings of that stuff going on is gonna maybe change things a lot.
It would make a difference if America wasn't oil dependent on others, for sure. Yeah, it would make a difference. In a later study, when we go through the Iranian Revolution and the Iran-Iraq War, when we see when the U.S. got involved and others got involved, is when they started to bomb the oil fields. Okay, so.
Oh, just a minute, Jim had a comment here.
Yeah, I just had a comment. When I watched that Once Upon a Time in Iraq, I was just seen that the Sunnis and the Shias said that they used to get along fine before.
Yes.
So it's mainly a later developing thing that has happened there.
It actually starts with Zarqawi, if I remember right.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I put these notes together, so we'll kind of see it together. But it starts with Zarqawi, because Zarqawi is the one that wanted to really instigate them to go against each other. And it was interesting you say that, because I think we talked about it last week, or whenever we did this last, I can't remember. Someplace I know we talked about it, that there was one of the videos that I watched. Actually, it was a video I posted in one of the chats, probably Sac Fellowship maybe, and that there was a lot of comments under there, and the people were, the list of comments that I read, I didn't go through all of them, but just, 10 or 12 of them that I was reading, it was either a Sunni saying that they love the Shias and it's the government's problem, or it was a Sunni that was saying we love the Shias and the government is causing all this problem. So it was interesting to see that they, and I saw that in that video too that you're talking about, that they did get along. They didn't have problems. They accepted each other for whoever they are. It's like when you bring extremism in, that you start seeing your problems.
Yeah, you got to find an enemy.
Yeah. So, so this is the making of ISIS. The roots of ISIS trace back to 2004, when the organization known as Al-Qaeda in Iraq formed. So you had Al-Qaeda, you had bin Laden being the leader, but now you're going to have Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and that's Zarqawi, al-Zarqawi, who was originally part of Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda network, founded this military group. So he's the founder of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. The U.S. invasion of Iraq began in 2003, and the aim of Al-Qaeda in Iraq was to remove Western occupation and replace it with a Sunni Islamist regime. When Zarqawi was killed during a U.S. airstrike in 2006, Egyptian Abu Ayyub al-Mazri became the new leader and renamed the group, I don't know how you're going to say that, but it's ISIS, Islamic State of Iraq. In 2010, Mazri died in a U.S.-Iraqi operation, and al-Bakr al-Baghdadi took power. When the civil war in Syria started, ISIS fought against Syrian forces and gained ground throughout the region. In 2013, the group officially renamed themselves ISIS, which stands for Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, because they had expanded into Syria. So it's kind of a progressive thing. ICE, or I don't know how you say it, ICE, I don't know how you say it with the I on the end of it. I don't want to say it wrong, but then you go to from Islamic State of Iraq to ISIS. And then there was also, we went through before, the ISIL, which was the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. So they took advantage of the Syrian war to come in the chaos that was going on in the Syrian war and spread in through, then they were spreading through Iraq and Syria. So 2003, the US invades Iraq. 2004, Al-Qaeda in Iraq is formed, al-Zarqawi, to remove Western occupation. 2006, the US kills Zarqawi, and al-Mazri renames it to Islamic State of Iraq. In 2010, al-Mazri dies, al-Bakr al-Baghdadi takes over. In 2013, Islamic State of Iraq and Syria is formed. So ISIS and Sharia law. ISIS rule spread quickly throughout Iraq and Syria. The group focused on creating an Islamic state and implementing Sharia law, a strict religious code based on traditional Islamic rules and practices. So wherever they go and conquer a territory, then that's their government, and they enforce it. In 2014, ISIS took control of Fallujah, Mosul, and Tikrit in Iraq, and declared itself a caliphate, which is political and religious territory ruled by a leader known as a caliph. ISIS fighters attacked a northern town in Iraq that was home to the Yazidis, a minority religious group. In August 2014, they killed hundreds of people, sold women into slavery, forced religious conversions, and caused tens of thousands of Yazidis to flee from their homes. The attack sparked international media coverage and brought attention to the brutal tactics employed by ISIS. Also in 2014, Al-Qaeda broke ties with ISIS, formally rejecting the group and disavowing their activities. So you have Al-Qaeda and ISIS no longer a part of each other. The Islamic State group erupted from the chaos of Syria and Iraq's conflicts and swiftly did what no Islamic militant group had done before, conquering a giant stretch of territory and declaring itself a caliphate. So this was the territory here that was ruled by them, as a good portion of Iraq and a good portion here of Iran or Syria as well. Its territorial rule, and remember and back in the Saddam study, which we haven't done yet, Saddam wanted to be the ruler of the Middle East. He wanted to be the ruler over all the Arab nations. And that was part of his purpose of going into Iran as well. Its territorial rule, which at its height in 2014 stretched across nearly a third of both Syria and Iraq, and ended in March 2019 with a last stand by several hundred of its militants at a tiny Syrian village on the banks of the Euphrates near the border with Iraq. So we saw the rise in 2014, and we saw it end in 2019, which are waymarks on our line, 2014 and 2019. And this was the Battle of Rafia, not this being the Battle of Rafia, but that's the time period we're looking at, the Battle of Rafia, where we see the King of the South has a victory. And we kind of pointed out before that when the King of the North has a victory, you have a rise of Islam, and at the victory of the King of the South, you have a restraint on Islam. So 2019 is marking a restraint on Islam here.
In 2014, where it says that the Yazidis,
yeah,
media coverage of the Yazidis, weren't the Yazidis, weren't they Christian or a minority type Christian sect?
It didn't say specifically a minority religious group. I thought I remembered perhaps, but I don't remember for sure.
Yeah, that's what I thought I remembered, but
it kind of sounds familiar that they were Christian, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'd have to look it up again, but I don't remember. But I think I did read that somewhere that they were Christian. Minority religious group, whatever they were though. Okay. So 2004 to 2011, in the chaos following the 2003 US-led invasion of Iraq, an Al-Qaeda offshoot sets up there, changing its name in 2006 to Islamic State of Iraq, and that was Zarqawi. 2011, after Syria's crisis begins, the group's leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, sends operatives there to set up a Syrian subsidiary. Baghdadi follows in 2013, breaking with Al-Qaeda and renaming his group the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. I don't remember if it's in these notes, but this break, I don't remember, maybe somebody remembers what year bin Laden died, but Al-Qaeda rejected them because they were killing fellow Muslims. And they kind of went with when you go to Zarqawi and then Baghdadi, they went with their own agenda and killing brother Muslims, which I thought was interesting because, just pops into my head going back to the thoughts on whether or not at the very end, the Sunnis and the Shiites unite, because Al-Qaeda wasn't about fighting brother Muslims. Even if they had different beliefs, they were against the West coming in there in bringing Western influence in there. So 2014, its sudden success starts with the seizure of Fallujah in Iraq and Raqqa in Syria at the turn of the year. The extremists take Mosul and Tikrit in June and overrun the border with Syria. At Mosul's Great Mosque, Baghdadi renames the group Islamic State, ICE, and declares a caliphate. So begins a reign of terror. In Iraq, ISIS slaughters thousands of Yazidis in Sinjar and forces more than 7,000 women and girls into sexual slavery. In Syria, it massacres hundreds of members of the Shiite tribe. ISIS beheads Western hostages in grotesquely choreographed films. In September, the United States builds a coalition against ISIS and starts airstrikes to stop its momentum, helping the Syrian Kurdish YPG militia turn the militants back from Kobani on the border with Turkey. I was also reading on the Kurds, and I don't remember when I know I mentioned this with somebody when we were talking, I don't think it was on the study though, with the Kurds, that they go way back in history as well. When it comes to, because Kurdistan is part of Turkey, southern Turkey, and the Kurds were, they had their own language they talked, they had their own culture, and Turkey did not allow them to live their own culture and even to speak their own language. And that's not something I put together in notes. It was just one night, some of the reading, I wanted to dig in and look at who the Kurds were. But they go way back in history in the fighting, because we had the United States. The United States was actually supporting the Kurds, and when Trump said he was going to pull out, there was that fear that Turkey was going to come in and wipe out the Kurds, and Turkey believed that the Kurds were terrorists. So if the United States was backing the Kurds, then they considered the United States as terrorists. So anyway, so there's some history there to be understood with the Kurdish people as well. And they are a good part of who helped fight ISIS and get them out of the area. So the US coalition's airstrike begins in 2014. In 2015, militants in Paris attack a satirical newspaper and a kosher supermarket, the bloody start of a wave of attacks that ISIS claims around the world. Militants in Libya beheaded Christians and pledge allegiance to ISIS, followed by groups in other countries, but they stay operationally independent. In May, ISIS takes Ramadi in Iraq and the ancient desert town of Palmyra in Syria. By the end of the year, it is on the back foot in both countries. So this was the strike against the Charlie Hebdo newspaper. Maybe some of you remember that. I remember seeing that in the news. The attack comes as thousands of Europeans have joined jihadist groups in Iraq and Syria, further fueling concerns about Islamic radicalization and terrorism being imported. Those worries have been especially acute in France, where fears have grown that militants are bent on retaliation of the government's support for the United States-led air campaign against jihadists with the Islamic State group in Syria and Iraq. In 2016, Iraq takes back Fallujah in June, the first town ISIS had captured during its initial blaze of success. In August, US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces spearheaded the Kurdish YPG, takes Manbij in Syria. Alarmed by the Kurdish advances near its own frontier, Turkey launches an offensive into Syria against both ISIS and the YPG. Enmity between Turkey and the YPG will continue to complicate operations against ISIS. And that's kind of what I was talking about with the Kurds and Turkey, that they had an anger between them that was part of this problem as well. So the YPG is mainly Kurdish militia in Syria and the primary component of the Syrian Democratic Forces. The YPG mostly consists of ethnic Kurds, but also includes Arabs and foreign volunteers. It is closely allied to the Syriac Military Council, a militia of the Syrians. The YPG was formed in 2011. It expanded rapidly in the Syrian civil war and came to predominance over other armed Kurdish groups. A sister group, the Women's Protection Units, YPJ, fights alongside them. The YPG is active in northern and eastern Syria. And I don't know what time we have here. Because we're going to be, I don't know if anybody, we break for lunch at 12:30, right?
It's 12:32. That's usually when we
We
stop.
break for lunch. Okay, this one has a little ways to go, if I remember right. Plus, I'd rather be able to spend a little bit more time as we go and try to look at putting the lines together to some extent, which is at the very end of the slide. So I think that maybe we'll wrap it up here. Anybody have any comments?
Well, I looked up about the Yazdis, and it doesn't look like they were Christian.
Okay. Okay.
And also, Osama bin Laden died on May 2nd, 2011.
2011. Okay. Yeah, I couldn't remember. That would have been the time of Obama.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
So, anything else? Is everybody following okay somewhat? I mean, it's a lot of history, a lot of details, but I think we're going to be better off for this. I know I have been blessed by at least getting to know somewhat of who they are and why each entity is, but it's really hard because there's so many entities involved. And when you have, like, during the Afghanistan war, you see Saudi Arabia and the United States combining to help support and fight to keep the USSR out. At the same time, during the Iran-Iraq war, you have the Soviets and the United States helping Saddam Hussein put out the Shiite revolution that rose up, and they don't want it to spread into Iraq. So there's a lot to understand, but if everybody, my prayer for these studies is that it's going to help somebody that is better at making connections than I am of the significant events and lining them up on the line between 1798 and 1863 and then 1989. And we would want to include 1979 because that all leads up to it. So I guess with that, we'll end it there. Somebody have a question or a comment? No, and I will have to mark where we're at when we close out of here.
Thank you, Sister Elaine. It
Yeah,
was a very good presentation. It's so nice that you add some, other info, you collect the information and put it on the line. Thank you.
yeah, I'm trying to do that. I'll pull that page up just that I just started today, this morning. It's just been on my mind for a long time to try to get there. And this is all I've done with it, is just bring them together. But to show, this is what we went through with the Egyptian, the timeline of Josiah Litch and the Napoleon's Egyptian expedition, and how that led to the vacuum that brought rise to radical Islam. And then you have Wahhabis, because that's what this is bringing this rise of Wahhabism in here. And then this is the House of Saud line that shows them the attack on the Shiite, and that's when the Ottomans and the Egyptians saw them as a threat to peace. So they take out the Wahhabis here, and that's the end of the first Saudi state. But we see that later the Saudi state comes back up, and that's when you're going to go into the second Saudi state. But that's, later on. But this was the line that brought us all the way through Josiah Litch's notes. and looking at the first Egyptian-Ottoman War, 1831 to 1833, and the second from 1839 to 1841, basically a 10-year proxy war between Egypt and Syria, or Turkey, Syria, the king of the north, the king of the south. And we saw in that study here that in this 2-year portion of it here, that in the middle is where the Turkish Sultan gives his hand over, however you want to say it, goes to the Allied powers and the Christian nations. So anyway, so that's what brings this restraint, and we know we'll lined up that restraint with 2020, which helped us to understand that 2020 would be a restraint of Islam, not an attack like in Nashville that was predicted. So as we continue through this prayerfully, someone will come up and understand and be able to make all the right connections. So, and then I just threw this line down here to try to grab up quickly. This was out of my World War III notes that from the presentation in Kenya, just to start to put these guys in place, the Soviet Union and the US and the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, the Taliban, and then going into the Iran, Iraq, and then you're going to have ISIS in here. So it's just trying to bring them all together. And I will send out this file. This is just putting them there, but nothing being lined up perfectly. But when I send out the audio and stuff tonight, I'll reprint the file and send it out with the updates that I made on it, because the file I sent out last night did not have all that timeline that I was working on. So let's see. We want to close in prayer. Is Brother Bob with us?
Oh, could I make another comment?
Yes.
So I was looking up Yazidi also, and it says that it's a religion that includes elements of ancient Iranian religions, as well as elements of Judaism, Nestorian, Christianity, and Islam. So it has kind of a mixture, you know, and it would still come from, you know, what would you call that, Abrahamic type?
Yeah, thank you. And I thought it was interesting that before Muhammad, and that was in the Role of Islam study that we did, before Muhammad, it was a mixture, just like you just said. It was a mixture of all these different religions. They saw, you know, Catholicism in there, they saw the Jews in there, saw all this different mixture, the Christians in there. But what they rose up against, if I understood that correctly, many things, but they rose up against, they saw and this is what the extremists would fight against going forward all the way, was the idolatry that was going on, and that there's only one God. And so it brought this false religion into that time period when there was a whole mixture of religions going on. So a lot to understand. So I see Brother Victor is there. Maybe we can get Brother Victor to close us in prayer. If he's there. Are you there?
Sorry, I'm holding a crying baby.
Oh, we can have somebody else. But,
Very sorry.
Sister Kathy Brown.
She's not able to pray. I'll go ahead and pray.
Thank you.
Father in heaven, I thank you so much for this study we've just gone through, Lord. There's so much to know about how these things in the Middle East that we're unfamiliar with, Lord, line up with what we're doing now, Lord. And we need great wisdom, so we plead for your Holy Spirit to show us the way, Lord, as you always have. So we thank you for the presentation. We thank you for your beautiful Sabbath day, and pray now, Lord, that you would keep us ever close to you, Lord, and bless us till we meet again here shortly. And we pray it all in Jesus' name. Amen.
that.